President Trump faces trial next week on accusations he incited a harrowing and deadly siege at the U.S. Capitol on January 6th, when a mob overran the police and stormed the Capitol building. The White House passed a single article of impeachment against President Trump 1 week before he left office. I want to bring in our Victory News associate here, John Graves, about this. What are your thoughts about that impeachment trial?
You know, I think it's not just unconstitutional. I agree with 5 Republican senators who said this entire thing is unconstitutional. He's a private citizen. You can't remove him for office. And actually, what the president's attorney was pointing out that you referenced is it's really political payback, it's revenge, and it sets a very, very dangerous precedent. And there's only 2 reasons, but the main one is we don't want this guy to run again. I think they also want him and his family to live in fear because they can take away secret service protection for him like they have for all former presidents. So
this is going to happen. Apparently, thanks to a senator from Kentucky, Rand Paul, it doesn't look like there will be enough votes to convict. Could you tell us the process of what happens? There's a kind of like a grand jury hearing that happens in the House, and then they present it to the jury. Go ahead.
Yeah, they basically send it over to the Senate. They're supposed to start next week on the 9th of February. And what's supposed to happen for a president is the Chief Justice is supposed to rule over it. And this is to me, the common sense. Sometimes we get into all the technical legal stuff. The common sense thing is the judge is now going to be one of the Democrats who is telling the Republican McConnell he needs to get on board and impeach this guy. So the judge is saying it. The jury, over a majority of the jury, is all saying he should be impeached. So the very
jury
essence of this is supposed.
The jury is the Senate. They were sworn in as a jury.
The Senate. Yes, if you are, let's say you were accused of something, Greg, you're supposed to, under the Constitution, get a fair judge, and you're supposed to get a fair trial of a jury of your peers, not a jury of your political enemies. And so what's happening here, and there's always that to some extent in impeachment because of the bipartisan two-party system we have. And so what happens is the majority of these Democrats and a handful of, and you notice the clip that Mike just played, Collins was the one who met with Biden, flanked by Murkowski and some of the others that are also for the impeachment. They're Republicans, but they're for the impeachment. It's not going to happen. The whole thing's political theater. They're about 12 votes short already, just of the people who think the whole process is unconstitutional. But they're desperate to see, we don't ever want to deal with Donald Trump again, and in 4 years he can run again. And they're scared to death of that. And some of the Republicans are saying, hey, we could use this as an opportunity not to have to deal with him in the primary. It's not going to happen. I don't think it has. It's dead on arrival, in my opinion.
John, let's talk about the stimulus package that we heard in the news just a moment ago, and the fact that the Democrats are going to use reconciliation, which they have every right to do. But we keep going back to this theme of unity that the president talked about in his speech on Inauguration Day, and that doesn't really smack of unity, does it?
No, it doesn't. That's a good point. It doesn't smack of unity, but also you have to remember the Republicans have lost all control. Elections have consequences, and the Democrats are in the White House. They now control, although it's the smallest control margin since 1910 in the House. And then the Senate they control, and Kamala Harris is the tie-breaking vote. So as long as they get the Democrats to do anything they want to do for at least the next 2 years, they can do it without the Republicans. They can go through these maneuvers like reconciliation, but they're going to be able to do what they want to do unless a single Democrat in the Senate gives them a hard time and they can't find, which they'll be able to do. Even if they lose 2 or 3 or 4 Democrats in the Senate, they'll be able to find some Collins or Murkowski type Republicans to get over on many of their agendas.
In other international news, the Honduran National Congress strengthened pro-life laws last week by amending their national constitution to declare that unborn babies have the same rights as born human beings under the law. Breitbart reports that lawmakers passed the reforms on Thursday in response to growing international pressure on pro-life countries to legalize abortions. They amended the Honduran Constitution to read this: the unborn shall be considered as born for all rights according with the limits established by law. It is prohibited and illegal for the mother or a third party to practice any form of interruption of life on the unborn, whose life must be respected from conception. Greg, that's really good right there.
It's very interesting that that country is getting that done. I want to bring John Graves in on this. We interviewed David Barton yesterday, and David said this concerning politicians. He said, if I know where you stand on life, I pretty much 90% of the time will know how you vote on every other issue. Do you agree with that, and why is that?
I think I agree with David. It's so critical to me. I call it the slavery issue of our generation. 100 years ago, when there was slavery, people were justifying it over different reasons. And in 50 years, 20 years, we don't know. Our kids and grandkids are going to go, what were you doing, killing human beings? My wife and I and some of our kids are reading through the Bible this year, and this week we were reading the passages where the generations and different peoples were so evil they sacrificed their children. And so to me, it's an unbelievable thing. Thank God, God is moving in other nations. I believe He's still ready to move in this nation. There's been a setback towards that battle with this election result. And we stay in the battle, just like those who freed slavery, people in slavery. And so to me, when you focus on that issue, you kind of know where somebody stands. I'm not saying it's the only issue. There are a lot of moral issues of poverty and marriage and those kind of things. But this one, it has to rise to the top, in my opinion.
Yeah, I want to get your opinion on this Myanmar story that Mike read to us a while ago. About that is a hostile takeover of a Capitol building and a government.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts?
Yeah. To me, whenever you do that, I was actually gonna suggest that you guys start giving me questions in advance. Like if the White House press secretary is getting those questions in advance, then maybe Mike and I could start getting those. But anytime you talk about a hostile,
John, I'm going to circle back to you on that.
Okay. Thank you. Anytime you talk about a hostile takeover, you go back to the impeachment with Trump. You've got Pelosi, you've got Schumer, you've got Kamala Harris, the vice president, all calling for riots all summer long over police capitals, state capitals, over the BLM lives. And so if we're going to apply impeachment to the president saying, hey, this is a peaceful protest, it was a rally, and the riots were breaking out before he was even done talking, a long walk away. We watched it live here. Tim was there in person. To me, it's just more political theater. And so what we have to do is stay focused on what is the real issue. And I think you and I had talked about this earlier. We've got the Democrat Party doesn't really care about the Constitution. And so this is an opportunity to say, hey, let's talk about that. If you don't care about the Constitution, what are the consequences of that? And that is epic mess if you start taking that away.
John, you mentioned the fact that Democrats were calling for riots all last summer. That really is not in dispute. They really haven't disputed that when those claims have been made. However, what happened on January 6th really still is up in the air and can be disputed. Of course, I was there. I didn't witness any of that kind of thing while I was there, but really there was nothing, as you said, that the president mentioned in his speech that really in any way can be construed as inciting a riot. Can there?
Exactly. It's the same. There's two hypocrisies. The hypocrisy here is they're saying, oh, that incited it. So that's what that's the only thing we're talking about here, impeaching, that he incited insurrection. Okay. But if we incite insurrection on state capitals or the national capitals, that's okay. It's the exact same hypocrisy that you see in hate speech. What is happening right now? The leaders of the Democrat Party, the social media saying, oh, we do need to shut down anyone who has hate speech. Because that is a hook that everybody goes, oh, well, of course we don't want people to hate each other, so let's shut that down. The difference is the definition. Their definition is this: Black Lives Matter is a justifiable reason to burn down people's buildings, businesses, even black businesses and capitals and police stations, but not President Trump or his followers. If you stand for the unborn life or for God's creation of a man and a woman, that's hate speech, and we're going to shut you down. But if you stand for all the things we believe that are on the other side, that's not hate speech. You need to be protected. So there's a hypocrisy here that we just need to educate people, expose people. We don't need to take on their methods to do that, but we need to point out it's unjust scales.
The Republicans don't seem to be doing much to oppose Joe Biden's appointees for his cabinet. So far, 4 cabinet members have sailed through the process. In contrast, it took President Trump close to a month to get 12 cabinet members through the Senate with with all the Democrats pulling out the stops to try and delay that process. And John, I'll go back to you on this. What's good for one apparently is not good for the other.
Again, it's the same hypocrisy that we see over and over. And I would add what you just said is a good point on just getting his cabinet appointments. I worked with a lot of the faith-based departments, Dr. Ben Carson, for example, and we were in an all-day-long meeting, and it was over a year before he could get his first assistant in there. It's the same thing as impeachment. Go back to what happened at the very, very beginning. It was an impeachment push on day one. And it followed the entire presidency. Back then it was over Russia. It turned out to be nothing, and there was no just blowback. There was no justice. But I have hope. I believe people will wake up. We'll get to see some of this that's going, and sometimes God allows setbacks to wake people up because they see the persecution, and sometimes the church does its finest work when things are difficult.
Google and Facebook are being called to the carpet for their alleged anti-competitive business practices. The Epic Times is reporting that the HD Media company that operates a number of newspapers in West Virginia is asking a federal court whether the companies had violated antitrust laws. The Epic Times article says the suit claims the 2 big tech companies unlawfully exercised monopoly power of the digital advertising market and that they unlawfully conspired to engage in anti-competitive conduct. Also, that Facebook and Google agreed on a secret deal that Google named Jetty Blue. The suit is reported asking for order saying that Google and Facebook violated the law and should no longer be allowed to conduct business in such manner. All right, John Graves, there's been a lot of talk about social media and all of these things. What is antitrust? What is that?
Basically, antitrust is where they come in because somebody has such a monopoly that they begin to do unfair things and have unjust scales that Proverbs talks about. So go back in time and think of, Southwestern Bell and AT&T and the government coming in, splitting it up. What this country operates on is fair, competitive, openness, transparency, and treating everyone equal. Clearly, Facebook and Google and AWS, Amazon put their finger on the scales. They influence. There's even stuff Veritas has broken today that they admitted that they influenced and engaged themselves in the election for the favor of the President Joe Biden. So it's suppressing news or twisting news. And there was even articles leaked by their executives. They had an 86% chance to decide, this is Google, an undecided voter's decision, because we all type in something on a search engine. Google dominates, I think, 95% of it. And when we do, we think the most relevant, we think the most real, we think the most truthful because we trust, and therefore the antitrust laws say, hey, we got to break that up because they can just decide what articles are there. A lot of people are moving over to DuckDuckGo and other things, and I challenge our listeners. Go to Google and do something on Trump or whatever, and then go to DuckDuckGo and watch the stark differences of the information that will pull up for you.
So it's an algorithm, John? I know this is an expertise of yours with Million Voices. Is it an algorithm that does that
absolutely
weights those?
Absolutely. Yeah, so what they do, so here's an example. When you type in, let's say, should Trump be impeached, or, is the Russia thing, you're just doing your search engine, okay, on your phone or on your computer. Well, they decide there's 5,000 articles on that particular issue. They decide which ones are the top 10. No one scrolls down to the 4,782nd or reads all 5,000 articles. They just look at the couple ones because that's the only thing on their screen. And so Google literally did a study that says if we have an unknown voter and we show them 9 positive on one side and 1 negative, we can influence. We have an 86% chance to decide how that undecided voter is going to do. So look at how most people are upset.
How would they know if it's an unknown or undecided voter? Real quickly.
They just tested if they literally did test on this. If you're unknown, helping you make your decision, you're trying to look between the 2 candidates in any political race. They were obviously looking at the Trump race. They can say, oh, well, now what was your opinion before your searches? What was your opinion after your searches? And by giving you 9 in favor of what we want you to believe and 1 against, We still put something in there, but now all the top articles are supporting a narrative that you're trying to find the truth. That's the problem, is knowledge has now replaced truth, and Christians need to be very careful of that distinction.
Fascinating, very fascinating. John, I want to come back to you with this. We kind of lost track of down ballot things and initiatives, but now in Oregon, drugs, it's another indication of the times that we live in. We got a couple of minutes here.
Yeah, it's unbelievable because I don't want to get into the groundhog and global warming. We got record snow and cold coming, and yet we're passing the climate accord. But on Oregon, we're passing drugs, heroin, cocaine, meth, these kind of things, not just marijuana, but literally things that destroy people, that ruin lives, ruin people's marriages and children. It is just a sign of the times, and our prayer is that those experiments expose the darkness and the results of that, and people wake up.
Yeah. I find it interesting. We canceled the Keystone Pipeline, and now we're going to put crude oil in tankers and go across the ocean with it, or on train rail using diesel to pump it here by countries that don't like us very much. So none of this really does make sense, does it?
It doesn't. It's not just a jobs issue and an economic issue, which is a moral issue, by the way. The Scripture is very clear that economics are moral issues, but it's a national security issue. America has moved from depending on Iran and Saudi and the Middle East and Russia to energy independence under this last president, where we actually sell oil, and now we're going to be moving back. So it's not just the loss of economic issues, it's also going to be we're now dependent on other nations from a military standpoint. It's a national security issue, truly.
Yeah, it is. John Graves, thank you so much.